Hello, my name is Tim Benton. I'm a research director at Chatham House, which is an international affairs research institute and think tank in London. I also lead our energy, environment and resources team, which works on sustainability on an international level. We've recently published a report on food systems and biodiversity loss, which can be downloaded from the Chatham House website. But I just wanted to highlight some of the things that we were talking about within that report here today. And that's primarily that food and nature are intimately linked with each other. And this is for three main reasons. The first is that agriculture uses about half of the land on the planet that is suitable for human use and is the major driver of loss of natural habitat, which obviously directly impacts the animals and plants that would live in natural habitat through the loss of the habitat, but also it directly impacts on them by taking chunks of habitat and dividing them into ever smaller pieces, so that if populations are to survive, they have to move from one block to another block across land, which is not very suitable. And so that contributes to biodiversity loss. The second major reason that agriculture and food systems are interlinked, that biodiversity and food systems are interlinked, sorry, is that the land used for agriculture is typically degrading as a place for nature to live, primarily through intensification. And this is for multiple reasons. So as we increase the intensity and scale of agriculture, we remove spaces for nature to live within landscapes, and we lead towards monocultural habitat, which is only suitable for a very small proportion of the animals and plants that would normally live there. And of course, the input of nutrients and pesticides impacts on the non-target organisms, the things that are not grown from an agricultural perspective. And obviously, they also have downstream impacts on biodiversity as nutrients flow off agricultural land into watercourses downstream and even affect the oceans and so on. So agriculture not only drives habitat loss and through stimulating the change from natural to agricultural land, but the agricultural land, of course, is not a good habitat, and increasingly there is little space for nature in that. And the third reason that agriculture and food systems impact biodiversity is through driving climate change. About a third of all greenhouse gases that are emitted by humans are associated in some way with food systems, either the production of food, the conversion of land for food, nutrient management, nutrient production, transport, processing, manufacture, and waste of food, and so on. So by driving climate change, this is directly impacting on ecology, degrading habitat for the species that would normally live there, changing weather patterns, and so on. So why is the food system such a driver of biodiversity loss? Well, it effectively comes from the way that we have spent over the last 60 or 70 years creating our food system, and that is based on the premise that making food cheaper and more available is a good thing from a public goods perspective. But we've got to the point where this becomes counterproductive, because as we drive up the yields of crop plants and we open up markets and allow globalized supply chains more and more, it incentivizes larger scale agriculture. That drives down prices. As we drive down prices, it means that food becomes more available. We eat more of that food, and that leads to problems to do with ill health on a global basis, from obesity. As food becomes cheaper, it means that we waste more food and don't actually eat it, which creates a problem in itself. As we make food cheaper and more available, it becomes economically possible to feed food that we would otherwise have eaten to livestock, So we have a rise of grain-fed livestock. That means that meat prices come down, so that stimulates the consumption of more meat over and above health needs, and that in itself drives climate change and incentivizes the conversion of rainforests to land for cattle and land for feed. So the more we concentrate now on producing ever cheaper food, the more we actually start creating problems rather than solving problems from an environmental perspective. So as our report says, we think that there are three major things that we can do to make our food system better. Three main levers. The first is to change our diets. Now, diets on a global basis are typically unhealthy and are creating a healthcare crisis in themselves. If we ate more healthily, then we would also eat more sustainably, because the footprint of a healthy diet is typically less than the footprint of a typical Western diet. So it would be plant rich, it would be diverse, so we'd have fewer monocultures and more heterogeneous landscapes. We would eat more whole grains, less hyper-processed food, and perhaps importantly also less meat. And if we eat the right amount rather than too much, and if we reduce the amount of food we waste, together collectively, were the world to adopt healthier diets, then that would significantly reduce the pressure on land. If we reduce the pressure on land, it becomes much more possible to protect natural habitat. At the moment, the incentives are to convert natural habitat into agricultural land. If we have less demand, then those incentives perhaps fall away. So we can protect the natural habitat because that's where the bulk of biodiversity lives. You know, it's evolved to live in natural habitat. It's not evolved to live in agricultural landscapes. So we gain most by protecting the land that is still to be converted. And thirdly, if our demand for food shrinks, and if we protect natural habitat, there is still space then for farming in a way that is much more nature positive, nature friendly, agroecological, and perhaps also regenerative. So we can farm in ways that allow space for nature to live within the farmed environment, heterogeneous landscapes, low inputs, agroecological pressures, and so on. So in sum, our food systems are responsible for degrading nature all around the world, and it is possible to imagine ways that, particularly through changing diets, we enable the recovery of the planet.